Right, sorry about that,
It's okay.
Hasan. Can we do one more just to sync it since I just started the video? Do you
Sure.
mind clapping? And awesome, thank you. So what were some of the elements that made this passage possible? Was there a big advocacy movement? Did you do a lot of kind of community awareness raising?
There was a large amount of advocacy. The task force itself was created and consisted of representatives from the legislature, the House and Senate, representatives from each of the agencies, mental health, juvenile justice, child welfare, the courts, public defenders, prosecutors, and it had some advocates too, some private folks. And then there was a strong advocacy support group who had been watching these issues for a long time that we worked with on a number of issues. Once we started through the process, it got complicated because there's still lots of folks who instinctively, especially in government, in politics, go to the tough on crime. Crimes are crimes, and we should be, very clear. And it took a lot of work to introduce brain-based research, this neuroscience, to introduce trauma-informed care, to introduce all of the new data we have since the 90s that tells us that we actually get a degrading result by locking children up, especially if it's not for the right thing and not for the right length of time. And so it took a lot of education, a lot of experts. We brought in folks from other places to support our stances, and I think really build a sense of support through data. And I think data is such an important piece of this. Anecdotes only get you so far, because there are lots of anecdotes about the kid who got locked up that one time and never committed another crime, and now they're at MIT on the dean's list. And I said, well, Senator, that sounds like a great example, but my guess would be that child should have never been locked up. So the process that we're trying to put in place now would have made sure that they got services, and they would still be at MIT, and they would never be able to say, that one time I was locked up, I was so afraid, I didn't sleep all night, and I never want to go there again, right? And so a lot of conversation like that, and I think in the end, we found a great amount of support with the agencies agreeing to work together differently. We all have our silos, and for so long, the same child was cycled through each of our agencies, from education to child and family services because of dependence and neglect, and then they slip into juvenile justice, and they go back to the courts as a ward of the court, and we finally all sat down, and we're in a position to say, we're working with the same children and we want the same outcome. Maybe we can agree, even if it's not very comfortable, that we can do things a little differently, and we can start building these partnerships differently so that we can get a different result. And I think that in of itself, agency-wide in the executive branch, was a very big step. And so with that and the support of the legislators and the community, we were able to push it through. There were some resistance, as you might imagine, but I think that we addressed a lot of those concerns and managed to make concessions where we had to in order to make sure we had a good foundation for hopefully moving forward with even more reform and better results for the children we serve.
Good, that's great. Good, all right, so I also just wanted to give you a moment to just sort of talk broadly about the work that you're doing. I know there's a lot going on in Kentucky, if there are other sort of successes or wins to share, any
Sure.
other big...
Well, Kentucky is doing a lot of great work around children, and I don't think it's a new thing, but I think the level of concerted effort where everybody can see it is really invigorating. In education, we've got a lot of initiatives going on in juvenile justice, partnering with other folks, because ultimately my job is to pick up where every other system has failed to act or wasn't able to act deeply enough. And so having that conversation about how we support systems that we don't normally support has been really interesting. People say, so why are you at the education conference, Hasan? I said, well, because I know that a child who fails in education is going to be in my system. And I'm at the child welfare conference because if they fail in dependence and neglect systems, they're going to be in my system. It all kind of runs to me. And so the more support I can give to you all, the more I can say about how important it is. And I spend a lot of time speaking. I speak to the issues and letting people know that this is important. I came up through this system. I've got 2 brothers serving life sentences. I've buried cousins when I was young. And so I know, that not only economic impact, but the social impact, the familial, historical, generational impact that this has. So the more we can do on the front end, the more we can do to prevent instead of trying to interrupt behavior, to create. And, we always say, they call us rehabilitation, but the truth is very often we're habilitation. We're the very first time. We're not trying to put them back to where they were. We're trying to put them someplace better. I tell my folks that every child ought to leave us more whole, not with more holes. And that is a very difficult ideology to embrace when you are considered to be corrections. But I said, we are child services. Our job is to make the child better having touched us, not worse, and whatever it takes. If it means that we have to engage the family, if it means that we have to figure out community support, if it means that we have to go to school and advocate to make sure they get the right classes because of their disability, then we will do that, or we will support the systems that ought to be doing it until they're willing to own their responsibility for it. But failure is not an option, and if that is our bottom line, then everything we do is the right thing to do.
That's so great. That's so well said. How does the JJDPA, the federal law, help that?
The Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act is a great support. I mean, it gives us the core requirements. The 4 core requirements really do provide us guidelines, at least the base minimums of what we do. And it gives us, really good structure when it talks about status offenders not being locked up. It talks about children not being allowed to be locked and detained with adults. It talks about disproportionate minority contact and the impact that disproportionate representation in the system has on the system, the community, the families. And so using those core requirements really does give us the leverage when you have folks who don't want to do the right thing because it's the right thing. It's nice to have, somebody say, and sometimes I call it the boogeyman. I don't think the feds are the boogeyman, but sometimes you get to say, well, I understand that that's not what you prefer, but we do have these requirements. And so we have to at least meet these requirements, and they're very clear. So these are things that we have to do. Even if you don't think they're necessary, you don't think kids ought to be separated from adults because of you committed a crime, but there's some pretty clear language on it. And so in order to preserve our funding, in order to make sure we can do these other things, we have to abide by these. And then, it gives us the leverage to resist sometimes folks, and I don't know if it's well-intentioned or not well-intentioned, but sometimes people have very insular opinions about young people in crisis. And those opinions, if not guided by, I think, other pieces, would put us in some dire straits with the way we treat young people and the results we ultimately get from young people.
Yeah. Is there a specific story you can share briefly without naming any names about where you were able to invoke the JJDPA?
I invoke it often. I think that the place where we use the act itself, and I've had the opportunity to testify before Congress on the reauthorization, and I've just been a proponent for years, and we actually used status offense in that case because Kentucky was one of the two highest rates of detaining status offenders in the nation. And so part of it was we were able to take that data and we published it. And so Kentucky, here's one of those stats you don't want to be proud of. We're in the top 2, and what we did is we published by county. So each judge knew who was the judge locking kids up that should not be locked up. And the great thing about it is one of the counties that was the highest, the judge came to us afterwards and said, because it's one of those things that you don't know if you're just doing your work, because these are decisions made insularly over time. But once we did that, the judge came to us and said, this is unacceptable for us. And so I want to do something different. And I actually sent a team of my folks to that county on the other side of the state for weeks at a time, and they went through their data system and their database of young people over several years and built a database by hand to actually identify where in the system this thing was happening, and then to come up with solutions. As a result of that, and because of the status offense issue, we offered them more support. We developed some programming. I repurposed one of my staff to the school that was the highest referral to the system for status offenders, and actually had them as that first contact. If a child was in crisis, if a teacher was having trouble, if there was a problem with the school resource officer, they came to my staff who did an assessment, just like we're talking about now in the bill, right? Did an assessment, identified services, referred to services, followed up with support, and in the last 2 years that we've had it operating, they've seen a 60% reduction in referrals out of school to the courts. 60%. And that's before we even got to the bill. And so this is the kind of stuff that we're hoping to really build on. But because we had the Status Offense Act language, right, that one core component that said, you know, we have to look at this, we were able to take a conversation in a different direction. And now we've got 5 other counties, you know, asking us, the county attorneys, the school system, saying, you think we might be able to do something like that? And this would have never happened if we didn't have the ability to take that data, put it out there, talk about the consequences of it, and say, we're not interested in pointing our finger at you, because obviously you're sending them to us because you think there's a need. We just want to fill the need differently. And I think that's the kind of partnerships that we get when we get to expand our thinking about what our role is and how we interpret what the Act does and expects.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. And last but not least, as Patrick said, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience? Is this your first time at the conference?
Yeah.
So how has it been?
Well, this is my first time at Ready by 21. When I first saw the information on it and received some of it, and my wife, who directs the Promise Neighborhood and does lots of this great work, you know, said, you know, you might be interested in this too. I was like, you know, yeah. And then when I got here, I told somebody the other day, you know, it's one of those things where you go, I just heard of you, and now I'm thinking, why have I just heard of you, right? Why haven't I been here for the last 10 years? These are my people. These are the conversations I'm having every day. And so for me, it's been really exciting. I've met lots of folks who are passionate, like I am, about making young people's life trajectories, raising those trajectories as high as we can, and then going a little further. And it's been really exciting.